and welcome to another Biddle on Saturday, August 22nd, 2020. How's everybody doing? Hey, it looks like Zoom did an old Crasholo on me. Like everybody's frozen. That's fantastic. I love it. So, yeah. Let's see if we can get Zoom back up here. Are you guys unfrozen now? You need to unmute yourselves.
Hello.
Hi there.
I could.
Hey.
Hello.
How is everybody?
All good.
Some buffering there for a while.
So that was the most terrible intro ever made known to man, but we're officially open for business anyway.
All right.
I don't know what it is with Zoom. Every time I start live streaming, in the very start of it, it just goes haywire, crazy. I don't know what's going on with it. But anyway, we're here, and we got an open forum to talk about. So what have you guys been up to?
That's a good question.
Oh, yeah, you know, Linuxy stuff, you know.
It's hard to think when it's so cold.
The weather's been so nice here, I've spent very little time.
Jinder, go ahead.
I for some reason, I always get old PCs and stuff from people. My company, when they throw them away, I try to give them to the guys in the shop. And one of the guys in the shop got a new computer, so he gave me his antique old computer, and I could not get rid of it. So I stuck it on Craigslist, believe it or not. And I got probably about 20 responses in less than 5 hours for it, which it was an E2200 Pentium, which is like, it was equivalent to a really low end, I would say Chromebook.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's pretty much worthless, but I couldn't believe how many responses I got. But out of the 20 responses, I got 2 people asking me more about Linux than they wanted to know about the PC.
Nice.
Because I always thought that was really kind of cool. I was like, okay, here's your old new PC. It's got MX Linux on it. Here's all the software. Here's what I tested on it. And the one guy's like, you know, I want to run that Linux. And I'm like, okay, just don't get this computer. Go here and burn it. You know what I mean? Go here and download it.
Hey, that's one way to do it, brother. It's one way to get the word out.
Hey, at least I got one guy running it.
Yep.
As long as that computer will last.
Yes. Well, speaking of lasting, Computer Kid's processor didn't last very long. Or did it? How'd that upgrade go, brother?
Okay, so get ready for story time. So it actually did last a while. This laptop, I checked, it is not 15-year-old, or it's not from 2015, like I told you in the last episode. It's from, actually, I'm not 100% sure, but I know it was 2011 or before that, so it's at least 9 years old. Anyways, it was Monday or Tuesday, I'm not sure now, but I got the CPU and I immediately, first I stopped to do a quick dance of happiness because I was so excited. And then I grabbed the CPU and the laptop and then alcohol and tissues to clean off the CPU and my thermal paste, a screwdriver and all that. And I rush up the stairs to a desk where that laptop spent for the remainder of 3 days that it took me while it was apart. Anyways, I take it apart, get the top plate off, and then it hit me. I probably should have done a BIOS update, or at least check to make sure I wouldn't need that. So I go to Dell.com and check out the versions of the BIOS they have. And I am pretty sure at this point from Dell.com that I've got a version late enough that it will support all the chipsets. There is an update, but it says that all it does is unlock some sort of extra audio driver thingy. I honestly don't know, but it wasn't important. So, the problem here is that I turn the thing off and then, okay, this is too long ago. I've forgotten at this point, but I try to turn it back on for something. Anyways, it doesn't turn back on. I checked to make sure everything's put back together right. It won't come back on. from power off. And at this point, I realized I need to pause the update because, you know, now it won't power on. So I go through all the basic stuff, trying to figure out why it won't power on, make sure it's fully assembled, plugged in. I try draining residual power from the CMOS battery, all the basic it won't boot up tricks. And it won't boot up. So somebody in, I think it was the Destination Linux Telegram channel suggested that I try pulling the CMOS battery out and then sticking it back in after about 30 seconds. And that worked, it boots up, but the power button still does nothing. And at this point, I'm sufficiently freaked out that my laptop's dead. So I spend the next day or so just trying random stuff that I hope will make it boot up. Obviously random within the realm of possibility that could fix it. And eventually, I think I'm just sitting there and I've tried all of my ideas and I look at the power button and realize that there's this, I don't even know how to explain it. The ribbon cable that the power button comes in on has like 4 little metal platey guys and one of them is bent back. So it wasn't making full contact to the motherboard. And so that was my problem. It was kind of disappointing that such an insignificant little issue broke the whole computer. So I tweezed it back into place, tried the boot up process again. This time it works and I managed to boot up fine. And so then I finally get to updating the CPU and I can't take my cooler off the CPU. The screws are on way too tight. So I have to get a different screwdriver, and actually I couldn't even get it unscrewed. It was on so tight. So I have to call in Dad, and then he gets it unscrewed. So that's good. But I get the thing taken off, clean it off, stick the new CPU in, and then it boots up fine. Everything works perfectly. And so I do some basic, Firefox. Everything feels a little bit snappier. I can tell that the fans didn't come on as fast or as hard. Obviously, I get hyperthreading now, so I think that should allow me to do some more multitasking. Now I get virtualization. I haven't tested this yet, but now I should be able to do virtual machines. Yay! And one thing I've noticed is that with this Zoom call, I still have Firefox open, and guess what? Not everything is crawling. It's beautiful. It's so good. I think that might be because of the hyperthreading, or maybe because of the gigahertz boost on the CPU, but everything feels a lot smoother. Multitasking has been better. It's overall been great. I later learned that, actually I learned this yesterday. It is possible and quite normal for motherboard manufacturers, including Dell, to lock their motherboards so that you can't upgrade CPUs. And so, it looks like there were a lot of problems I did not think were coming that didn't end up coming, but should have. A lot of times would have happened. So, all in all, it went very well. Everything feels faster now.
Well, that's awesome, dude. I'm so happy that you got it figured out, especially on your own too. Because there's been so many times where, I got something going on where I can't fix this, and now I got to call in somebody or just deal with it. Not know what to do exactly. And you work through it, got that pin connector bent where it's supposed to go to make contact. And yeah, that's awesome, dude.
If you're going to do virtual machines, make sure you look in the BIOS and turn on virtualization. It'll be V something. It'll have enable or disable or junk. You already know that.
I already found it in the BIOS once, because when I had this, when I had the Pentium in here, I was like, well, why can't I do my virtual machines? And so I went into the BIOS, flipped it on, tried to reboot. It still won't let me do virtual machines. And so eventually research led me to find out that it was a problem with the CPU not having the virtualization technologies. So now it's flipped on. I need to try it. I haven't yet. I haven't decided what I want to try.
Very nice. Very nice.
I also heard in there that dads are great. That's what I heard from that story.
I heard that Dad saved the day with that screw. I did.
Fine. He saved the day.
Oh, you did an awesome job, Computer Kid. Way to go. That is some excellent work on your part.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the route most people take is tossing it in the bin. So you
Yep.
saved its life.
This is my best laptop, and I have no money to replace it. I can't toss this one in the bin.
It's a good call.
This is I take such good care of my laptops because I know that I can't really replace them. That's why this thing got a CPU upgrade, because I was like, I want this to last as long as it can. So that's one of the reasons I got so mad when the power button broke. I was like, I took such good care of this, and now I'll boot up.
Working on laptops is kind of like working on fine jewelry and Rolexes.
You know, I have to say, I'm really impressed by how usable things like Sandy Bridge chipsets still are, like 9-10 years later.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that because they were that good of processors, or is that because we have like smoothed out the code of things, and how maybe the drivers are better now? I don't know exactly what goes into that, but
it's because we're running Linux and we're not constantly trying to tax the CPU to its limit.
It's a bit of all of it, really. I think one of the benefits that we have, especially, like you said, Computer Kid with Linux, is that it's very scalable. It runs on just about anything. And then I think on top of that, I mean, there's probably less complexity in slightly older processors, which does help a lot for them to be running for long periods of time without weird hiccups. So, I mean, not that they're not complex, but
Another
CPUs haven't changed for a long time.
Yeah,
CPUs slightly smaller, and that's it. The stuff inside gets slightly smaller.
Yeah, CPUs haven't.
Nothing more.
Yeah, CPUs haven't changed that much, and I don't think operating systems have really started to bloat up as much as they used to in the past.
Yeah,
that's kind of stayed in the same realm. I mean, I have a Sandy Bridge based ThinkPad. I threw Fedora Silverblue on it a few days ago to test around, and it runs smooth.
So am I running a Sandy Bridge then? I don't know that much about CPUs.
It was I think you said, I think I looked at it and you had a 2000 series processor.
It was, I think it was like 2011 Q something, maybe.
Yeah, I think that was that's the same processor generation that's in the ThinkPad X220, and I got one of those, and it's still very nice for running Linux.
Yep. Well,
another little bit of awesomeness is that my CPU usage right now on the Pentium would be in the 80s. It is currently in the 40s.
Oh, you chopped it in half.
Yeah, close to that. It looks very good.
Worthwhile upgrade, then, I say.
Well, I need to get to an email that we got to last week, and it was one that I mentioned about the FBI and NASA exposing new malware for Linux operating systems. We're not going to have that conversation. I just wanted to give you guys the link in the YouTube chat in case you wanted to check it out. So I'm putting the link in the YouTube chat. If you want to go check that out, search it out, that's fine. But I don't think that we're going to actually have that conversation because, I don't think we're going to have that conversation. And then there was also an email from Steve, and he gave a few suggestions on, I had said last week about learning audio or wanting to have time to learn audio. And he gave me quite a few nice suggestions and a nice email. So that was very nice. Thank you, Steve. And on the discourse forums, if you don't know, we have a discourse, and it's not the busiest one in the world, but that's what's nice about it, because the posts are usually quality posts. And Steve, sir, you posted about your blog that you started.
I did. I started a new blog. It went live this last week. I've been working on it for a couple of weeks. The actual story goes back to it's all front page Linux's fault. I actually, on the discourse forum for the DNL network, I was thinking to myself, I've always wanted to do some technical writing. I write a lot in my profession anyway, and one of the things that I've been helping out with in the different in Fedora and then also in MX now is their documentation. I thought it would be good to polish up my technical writing. So I thought, well, a blog would be a great way to do that. But then I thought, who wants to do their own blog? I mean, goodness gracious, Front Page Linux, I'll just post all my stuff to them. So I posted an article to them and waited and waited and waited and waited a little bit longer. But 2 weeks went by and it really didn't get any attention at all. And I thought, either they don't really want to publish it on Front Page Linux, or they're just way too busy to get to it. It just kind of fell through the cracks, I found out later. And there's no fault to those guys. I mean, they've got so much going on at the DNL network, and those guys are great. And that's an awesome community that they're building over there.
Yep.
And I thought to myself, I've got like 3 articles in the can, and they're all on MX Fluxbox. I don't think anybody wants to see 3 articles on Front Page Linux in 1 week on MX Fluxbox. So why don't I try to figure out this blog thing myself? So I looked into static site generators and using GitHub pages, and that was a whole new education for me. And started using Hugo. Hugo is my platform that I have chosen.
Oh yeah.
And not a bad pick, but I kind of discovered I am not a coder. My son is a coder. And I kind of discovered that a lot of the static site generation documentation is kind of written with people who understand, front page or website development, I think. And there's a lot of terminology that I didn't know. And so it was quite the learning experience, and I had fun with that. So it took me about a week to kind of learn the ins and outs of Hugo to get it to work the first time. And then I got it up on the site. It took me a whole nother evening to figure out how to do your own personal URL, custom URL with GitHub pages. I got that figured out and got that working. And that's when I published on the Discord forum that, is ready for you guys to take, or discourse forum for you guys to take a look at. And so it's Discover FOSS. And right now it's mostly focused on MX Fluxbox because I've been doing a lot with that community of late. I actually went through and did a full edit of the frequently asked questions for MX Fluxbox, which is kind of their manual that the main developer, Jerry, 3904, I think is his name in the MX forums, that he actually put together initially. I did an edit of that to kind of bring it more up to date with their latest version of MX Fluxbox. And I've been just involved in different things over there in the community. So if you go over to discoverfoss.com, pretty easy URL to remember, you'll see the MX articles. The top one is Pseudo-tiling, which that was a fun one to write about.
I just put that link in the chat. So what's that all about, Steve?
So pseudo-tiling is, once you've been using Linux for a while, everybody checks out eventually a tiling window manager. But in a lot of other desktop environments and also in Fluxbox, you can do pseudo-tiling, which is not true tiling window manager. Most tiling window managers, unless it's a manual tiler, it basically starts to fill the screen right away as soon as you open apps, and it'll auto arrange them for you. Pseudo-tiling in a floating window manager gives you the ability to tile your windows in whatever configuration you want to set up, but to do it with keyboard shortcuts, much like you would do in a tiling window manager. What I have set up in my MX Fluxbox is I can basically tile to half screen, left, right, half screen, top, bottom, and then quarter screen. So I could have 4 windows tiled at once on a screen. And that's what I've set up in my Fluxbox keys file, and I can do that all with keyboard shortcuts. And I actually remember back in 2005 or 6 when I was using Fluxbox for the first time, I remember doing some pseudo-tiling back then, but I'd kind of forgotten about it until somebody brought it up on the MX forum. And that's one of the things that I would like to do with my blog is there's a lot of neat things that happen on forums, like even in the Big Daddy forum, that it's just there on that forum. It's nowhere else. And there's a lot of neat tips and tricks that are on the MX forum that unless you join the MX forum and look in the MX forum, you're never going to see or find out about. And there's actually quite a lengthy thread on pseudo-tiling in the MX forum. So I actually linked to that in the bottom of the article if you want more information. on pseudo-tiling and how you can set it up in Fluxbox. I just give one example of how I do it. And what I use is basically the keyboard shortcuts that Ubuntu Mate uses for their pseudo-tiling, because they also do pseudo-tiling in quarters and half screens as well.
Yep.
So that's kind of the idea behind the blog, and also that top article that's on there right now. Well,
I had said in the pre-show that I know that at some point I must have tried Fluxbox, but I can't remember. Like there's nothing that stands out to me that says, yeah, I tried it and this happened, or, but like I said, I was probably such a noob that I didn't get the whole, what you could do with it.
That is one of the things that, and I mentioned this in the pre-show too, the MX development team has put a lot of work into presenting the Fluxbox window manager really as an immersive full desktop environment experience. You don't have to go through and manually set up connection to Wi-Fi or get a Wi-Fi manager, running in your toolbar. They do all that for you. They have some sane keyboard shortcuts that they've set up. They've also put a dock. Fluxbox normally would never have a dock, but they actually put a dock into Fluxbox. So you can have some quick launchers. They set up window icons. They have a special program that one of the MX community members wrote to actually graphically manipulate and add to the dock, because the dock is actually generated with just as a bash script. A series of bash scripts is what generates the dock in MX Fluxbox, but they actually have created a tool where you can do that graphically. And that's one of the amazing things. Those of you, and I'm kind of preaching to the choir, most of you have used MX, but that is one of the things that MX excels at, is they will create a GUI tool to do things that you normally have to do with manually configuring a text file. And they've done that with some of the Fluxbox tools that they've developed as well.
Nice. DJ, is this something that you're into, Fluxbox?
Well, years ago I've used, Windows managers I've stopped using. That was the only choice you had when I started. So I started with TWM way back in the dark ages, and we had versions of TileX on Unix as well. So yeah, those are nice, and they're great for things, but I just prefer to use the terminal window now. So yep.
Computer Kid, go ahead.
Your blog looks really good. I love the theme. I especially love that it's dark mode, and the articles and everything looked very well formatted and very nice. I wish you luck that it goes better than my blog, where I wrote one article and then never again.
Well, I've got one that I want to put out early this next week. I've already got a bunch of ideas in the can, so hopefully I can keep it going for a while. And actually, Computer Kid, it's dark theme because you have a dark theme chosen for Firefox and for your desktop environment. It should switch
after
to
I saw
light theme if you have a light theme.
Yep, after I saw how good it looked, I had to go check out your theme on the themes.gohugo.io and saw that it's got like an auto mode and then a light mode and then a dark mode that you can set when you build the site.
Yep. Yeah, it's set to auto right now. So I know when my son pulls it up on his computer, it always is a light white background. But I really do like that dark. I know the dark looks great. I really love that dark because I got some dark and some blue color there. Looks really good. It always is dark on my stuff because I'm always dark mode.
Yeah.
Well, it's dark for me right now, but I got Dark Reader on, so.
I see it in light mode because it's the sun.
Same, Rocco. I had to do it. I had to turn my Dark Reader off to see if it was really dark mode.
Well, I can't turn Dark Reader off while we're streaming because then my whole face is like as white as a ghost because like there's so much light. So I have to have Dark Reader on. But Vince, go ahead.
I just wanted to continue a little bit more on the topic of MX. It's been mentioned before, but in case people don't know, MX have released a plasma spin, and I've been trying it out this week. And the thing with KDE is I've never really gotten into it because I normally test a lot of my stuff on a potato laptop that I have. And whilst Plasma has brought down its RAM usage a lot over its recent releases. It still tended to, excuse me, chug a little bit on a really sort of slower processor. But with MX, I don't know what they've done. Everything just feels so fast and snappy with it. Like it looks great, like KDE always does. It looks beautiful. But for some reason, it runs really well on this laptop. And it's a Pentium something or other. Oh, sorry, it's an AMD something or other, but it's supposed to be sort of a Pentium level sort of processor as well. And so I'm thinking that I might keep this on here and give it more of a chance to see how I like Plasma. I'm used to, because I'm used to tiling window managers. I'm used to things just happening just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And KDE has always felt a little bit sluggish to me, but it doesn't on MX. So if people want to go try it out, I think it's fantastic.
So did you mention, are they doing anything to it, or is it just stock KDE Plasma?
I believe it's
themed.
Yeah, it's 5.14, and then they've got all their little tricks that they do. Everything that they do is a little bit of MX goodness.
Right.
I think
all the tools work.
I've seen Dolphin once mention, I think it might have been one of his videos, that the way they do their MX, they release the RAM when you close applications. So I think they somehow release the memory straight up, whereas a lot of applications in a lot of distros don't do that. That's why you probably find it snappier. Maybe they've done the same thing with KDE. I don't know how they do it. That's just the basics of how I know it. So
whatever they've done, it's magic.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I got some real potato laptops that I run as my daily drivers. I just use a lot of old stuff. The Computer Kid's talking about his 9-year-old laptop. I think 2 of my main laptops are 8-9 years old. But yeah, MX is just really so much snappier on those than some of the other distros I run. I actually love Ubuntu Mate, and I just recently switched one of my older laptops from Ubuntu Mate to MX because I've gotten into MX a little bit more. But then also, Ubuntu Mate was really starting to chug along on this potato laptop, and I don't think Ubuntu Mate is heavy at all usually.
Right.
Well, they're not running System D. MX Linux by default, and I think that really speeds it up for the slower processors and PCs.
Gotta get in those System D digs.
Well,
it also helps with
514. Go ahead, Steven.
It also helps with memory utilization as well if you're running a non-System D in a system.
Well, 514, is that the Debian? Is that the version that's in Debian for Plasma now? Is that what they're going by?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay. All right. Because that's, I like the idea of MX KDE, but I don't know if I'd want to run that old of a KDE version. Like
stable, Rocco. Stable. Yes,
Stable.
But there's been a lot of bug fixes since then, Colin.
Oh yeah.
And
Debian
stable
419.
Stable, I know. Stable. I get it. Well, Steve, you started your blog, and it was, I just recently found out, like this past week or the week before, that you can actually make a blog with standard notes. And Jason Evangelo made a blog, and Popey made a blog, and it's a plugin that goes along with standard notes that allows you to make one. And I thought about it, but I don't have nothing to say, so it'd be like an empty blog, but or I would make one. But I love using standard notes, and I just thought it awesome that you can actually make a blog out of it. So if any of you guys, go ahead.
You've started multiple podcasts and you have nothing to say.
I have nothing to talk about. Nothing.
Clearly.
That's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to start a blog. I kind of would like to do a podcast, but then I got to get into all the audio equipment. I don't think I have the funds to do all of that fun stuff, and I definitely don't want to get into video editing. That is not an interest of mine at all. And I'd rather just write. So I'm going to give that a whirl, and it's costing me $9 a year to do this blog because all I had to do is buy the domain name.
Yep. Well, I can tell you that audio editing is easier than video editing. Let me tell you, just straight out of the box, just is. So if you have a choice, like if you're thinking about starting something, podcast, YouTube channel, something, way easier to edit audio for a podcast than it is to edit video. If you're, maybe a perfectionist pixel guy like myself who wants everything perfect and can't make it perfect, and then I don't like it because it's, definitely audio is better. So.
Video editing's a lot of fun, Rocco.
Well, Colin, when I first started on YouTube, I didn't edit any of my videos. Like, I did them all in one take. Like, and I had to do them like 153 times in order to get that one take just where I wanted it, because I had no idea about video editing. So
yeah, I remember hearing Rocco jump into the Telegram groups. Oh man, second take, third take, fourth take, and I'm like, you could just cut that. But all right.
I had no idea what I was doing, dude. So there you go. Anybody else got something going on this week? Interesting? Want to talk
I did
about?
something a little crazy.
What'd you do?
I maybe turned my laptop into a Chromebook. So
What?
that's been fun. Oh yeah. I know, it's insane. So I'm pretty sure they don't make Chromebooks with like 10th gen Core i7s. So I had to take it upon myself to make that happen, because if there's anything I love, it's a waste of resources. And yeah, it works really wonderfully. I know we did a ChromeOS challenge like a year ago, maybe.
That
And
didn't go too well.
No, it didn't. So I'm here taking the burden for everybody else, taking one for the team, and highly recommend if you can live on web apps. Yeah.
Yep.
I concur. It is awesome.
That sounds like a pretty peppy Chromebook.
Yeah, the fastest Chrome has ever been.
Yep. All right, so we are going to talk about our must-have app list, but there was an article that I don't know, that came out that talked about contributors in open source, and this was way back in 2018 that this article came out. But it's timely because in the latest Linux user space, we might get into things like that, like talking about contributing to open source and that kind of stuff. So, but I just wanted to go through some of these numbers because, it's pretty astounding to me. So the big three companies that are contributing to open source are Microsoft, Google, and Red Hat. And, you probably, I guess in the Linux world, we don't want to hear that, because it's Microsoft and it's Google at the top. But that is the actual case of it. So Microsoft has 4,550 employees that contribute to open source. That is amazing to me that we have that many people in a company like Microsoft that's going to, I know that they got tons of people in the company, but for them to dedicate that many people to open source is amazing. Google comes in second with 2,267 employees that contribute to open source. So like Microsoft almost doubles them. And then of course, Red Hat has 2,027 employees that contribute. So what do you guys think about that whole idea of how much Microsoft is contributing and Google is contributing to open source?
Would that be including, Rocco, the fact that they have things like PowerShell that they've open sourced, so as everybody's working on PowerShell, which benefits Microsoft ultimately. Their terminal is open source, so you got a whole team at Microsoft working on their terminal. That really benefits Microsoft because it only,
right.
I doubt I'm going to install the Microsoft terminal on Linux because we already
you might
have a
like
ton of
PowerShell,
terminals.
dude.
PowerShell I've installed. I actually have written one program in PowerShell. It did what I needed it to do. It worked great.
Well, I don't know like all that it encompasses, but I do know that those numbers are coming from like GitHub. So the contributions are contributions made to GitHub by these companies. So,
and VS Code. They must have a huge team at Microsoft working on VS Code.
Yep. But we get to enjoy that if we like it, if we want to use it. I know people do. So
I'm just wondering how long have these figures been there for? I mean, is it in the last couple of years, or has it been over a long period of time that they've put that much into open source? I mean,
well, let's put it this way, Colin. I don't know like when they specifically started. It doesn't give specific dates, but you figure this, like I said, this came out in, I want to say, February of 2018.
We're looking at figures starting from late 2017 in October.
I was going to say about 2 years ago is when Microsoft bought into the Linux Foundation, and that was news.
Yep. And like I said, the reason I bring it up is because we hear all the time how, Microsoft, Google, they're out for money, and they are. There's no question about that. But there is, I guess my point is, there is a change happening that they didn't contribute before, and they are slowly, I guess, changing the culture of the company to maybe not everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe not every Microsoft employee, maybe not every Google employee, but the whole idea is the culture is changing a little bit. And I think that's ultimately a good thing.
Well, first of all, they're companies. So first thing they need to worry about is money, because they need to pay their employees. They need to have some plus so they can do development, research, because money fuels research. Also, they need to have enough plus to satisfy shareholders. But reality is a lot of culture inside these companies has always been a bit half and half. Some parts were okay with it, some parts are not okay with open source. We can see that in, for example, NVIDIA, the graphics card, the consumer graphics card department is actually, as far as I hear, quite against the open source, but some other parts of it are forced, and even NVIDIA contributes to the kernel, just not the consumer graphics card department. So it's like that in all the companies. We shouldn't just generalize that because they mostly deal with proprietary software, all the employees don't like open source. It's just that the path of the company is such that it prefers proprietary software because of certain prior thinking and stuff like that. Because for a long time, Microsoft was that code, that source is intellectual properties. It was started by Bill Gates and further by other CEOs. So we should understand that now that is changing. So more and more is open, but we should understand that their intellectual property first, because they believe that source code comes from our intellect, so it's our intellectual property.
Yeah. Computer Kid, what are your thoughts on the matter?
I'll tell you just one thing. Richard Stallman would have loved this. And by love, I am being very sarcastic.
It's a good thing we don't talk about him on this show.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of aspects to this. Who contributes and what the motives are behind these companies. TJ, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was looking at, it's been a couple of weeks ago, been digging into, open source is definitely on the rise, but what license is it being released under? And so that was one of the things I was more interested in. And as it turns out, at least for the last 2 years, that the copyleft, which is kind of the traditional GNU open source license, let's say version 2, not version 3. I don't think anybody has gone quite that far yet, but it only makes up about 10% of the open source licenses. The rest of it is under permissive licenses from either MIT, Apache, or some custom licenses that are written through like the GPL and some of those. So at least that's what I have found. And I think that's kind of telling that, yes, most of these large companies are, they're building cloud software, they're building software for business, they're building software for solutions in the enterprise. But we do get some indirect benefits from it. I mean, there are some things that are happening for us as well. But the license thing was really the thing that I was more interested in. Is it really true open source, or is it really more of the type of licensing that would favor a corporation.
Yep.
Microsoft, actually, most of the software is open source. They release under MIT, so a really permissive license.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I did actually get into PowerShell for a little bit in that community, and I watched some of the interviews with Microsoft employees. I do think there's a lot of employees that genuinely love open source and how open source works at Microsoft and some of these other big companies. I also think when you're a company that is a tech company and you're that big and you do software, should it surprise us that some of the biggest contributors to open source have jobs at these big tech companies that deal with and write software? Since people who love open source software love to develop and write software. You got to get a job somewhere. You got to feed your family somehow. So I think that it's not too much of a worry, especially when you see that they're using the MIT license and other open source and free software licenses to release their software. The code is there. You'll be able to fork it if need be, if you don't like the direction it's going. But I think the other fish in the pond that would contribute to open source, you can't point to one big company. So you don't have, other than Red Hat and Canonical, you don't really have any big company that's behind Linux and open source software besides those two that are clearly devoted to it. So you're going to have a whole thousands upon thousands of contributors to open source that are working at thousands and thousands of different companies. I would like to see that ratio. What's the ratio to all of the others at all of these other different companies compared to the numbers from Microsoft and Google?
Yep. Yeah, that would be interesting. But even so, it just surprises me that Microsoft doubles Google. Now, that may have changed since 2018. I don't know what the numbers are today specifically. And I probably should have looked that up or researched that a little bit more, but I don't know them numbers. But I would like to see some of them more comparative numbers.
Basic numbers like how many employees have probably got bigger, but ratio probably stayed somewhat the same.
The OCSI publishes numbers monthly. If you're interested in tracking that down, I think Google is somewhere around 4,200 contributors in the month of July.
Wow.
Microsoft is about 3,700. Red Hat's about 2,500. I mean, to your point, Steve, exactly. I mean, to do open source, you're not being paid for it unless your company is paying you to do it, and we all got to eat. So yeah, that's the problem. And open source, you have to have a revenue stream somewhere in order for people to do it, unless they're all retired and then doing it for free.
Yeah.
That's why we're glad Computer Kid loves open source.
Yeah, Computer Kid, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, did I leave my hand up from the last thing?
Yes, you did.
Sorry.
Dan Kelly, go ahead. You're on mute, Dan.
Sorry.
You knew that, though.
Yeah. No. What makes most people really nervous about Microsoft is they got this weird trend, and let's not forget they also purchased GitHub. And that left a lot of people feeling very uneasy on their motives. A lot of people buy into this thing because they see things going on in Linux and they don't want to be left out if something late breaking happens and they can develop a new product from Linux. So that might be why a lot of companies get into the open source software deal, is because they want to be where some of the action is, just in case the action really takes off, they can get a piece of it. And that's all I really have to say about that.
Well, about GitHub purchase, the whole why Microsoft bought the GitHub was because it was actually for quite a long time. Some employees in Microsoft wanted for Microsoft to buy GitHub because they knew it will soon go down because it was in red numbers and it was problematic. And at the end, it was so bad, it was either going to be sold or go down and go offline. So probably there was probably 4 or 5 companies in the world that could buy GitHub, and Microsoft is one of them, and Microsoft's got the best offer or the quickest offer out there. And I can say that, in my opinion, probably the best choice out of those companies that could buy it.
Right.
Yeah, it was a choice of having a lifeboat. It was known that they were losing money left and right, and they needed a bailout from somebody. But some people a lot of people in the Linux community just didn't get that. They thought it was a vicious attack when they bought GitHub, when in reality it was somebody coming along actually trying to save them.
Yeah, I actually remember I was reading an article. One of the employees said that he had a paper with for his boss why they should buy GitHub, and he had it in the desk for more than a year because he was of the opinion that there was no way community would want Microsoft to buy GitHub, even year before he was of that opinion. So, and even still, we had such a big uprising.
Anybody else want to jump in on the whole open source thing? That's fantastic. All right, let's move on.
We love open source.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to get to yet before we get into our must-have app list. One of them is Manjaro. So Robin, who usually makes the Biddle Europe, put a tweet out about I guess he didn't see the news about Manjaro, and there was a big uproar with the funds that go into Manjaro, and so I knew about it right when it happened, but I didn't really want to talk about it on this show until all of everything came out of what actually happened. And I don't know if we still know everything that happened. I don't know if we will ever know everything that happened. But from what I can tell, and Philip went on to Linux Unplugged and gave his side of the story, and there was another developer on there as well. And as far as what happened with the money, with the money thing, I guess there was a request for a laptop for a developer, and that request was given to the person that handles the requests. And I guess there was extras added on to the laptop that they wanted for this person, like extra memory, and it wasn't just a normal requisition for a laptop, but it was things that were needed for his development. And I guess the guy doing the request didn't want to approve it. And I guess the way Manjaro was set up, it wasn't his job to approve the requests, I guess. It was his job to merely manage the requests. And it basically wasn't in his authority to approve or disapprove of them, just to handle them. And he ended up quitting the Manjaro team forums. He was removed from the forums as well, and it just became a bad PR thing. And I don't know how many of you guys have talked about it on other places, but that's basically what I know. What do you guys think about it?
Well, I think that one of the things that is important to consider, and I think you did a good job kind of waiting to really dig into this, is that a lot of the times, depending on how things come out, at what time they come out, you don't have all the information, right? You need a full picture to kind of make these judgments and to look into what went down. And it is a bit difficult because with these projects, I mean, everything that they do is mostly donation based, or these funds are almost like a corporate thing, right? So you have to be careful with purchases you make. You have to be sure that they're in line with what makes sense to spend funds on, because the money that you're getting is supposed to go towards the project. So I think that it is important to realize that, this person wasn't just, handing out a laptop to their friend. It was actually somebody who was going to be using it to help with the project. And I definitely think it was interesting how much that blew up. I think that waiting it out is probably a good idea.
Well, the reason that I waited was because when it first came out, it was the guy that actually left that brought it to light. So you were hearing his side of the story, basically putting it out there that he declined. It was almost put out there in the sense of there was a backdoor laptop issuing going on, and I stopped it from happening, and I got fired. Basically, that's basically the gist of how it sounded when it came out. And you just, in those situations, you more or less have to wait until you hear the second side of the story, because from the first side of the story, it sounds pretty legit. But then when you hear all of the things that went behind the scenes and went on, and the whole concept of his job specifically, then it doesn't sound near as bad as it did. Now, I just found out today that the Manjaro forums went down, and they went offline, and I don't know, like, I don't have any concrete evidence or, specific things about it, but I just know that I was told that it went offline and they lost all of their history of the forums. That seems so weird to me.
Indeed, yes.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, actually.
It was a bad forum upgrade. They were upgrading the software and it went bad, corrupted the database. They couldn't get the data back, is what I heard on Linux Unplugged.
I'm so far behind in my podcast listening, dude.
The full story of what they explained on Linux Unplugged was that actually they lost all their images, like everything, branding, stuff in posts, all that. And they could tell from how much had been damaged during that update that it was never going to be fully the same. So they've moved that forum to archive dot whatever it was originally, Manjaro forums or whatever. And then they've started a new one, which they think in some ways is going to be nice, because what they actually said was there were people talking about like what movie they'd watched recently, and they'd rather that go on Facebook than the Manjaro forums. So they're going to try and weed that out a bit more in the new one, I guess, is what they said.
Keep it
on
more
the
Linuxy?
Linux Unplugged. Yeah, keep it Manjaro-y, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a hard place to be in. And I know there are multiple the thing is like sites going down or forums getting knackered in some way. It does tend to happen. I think it's really unfortunate that there weren't working backups that could restore that issue. My recommendation to everybody, I know it's difficult when all of the stuff goes away, and there's a lot of helpful things there that maybe probably aren't accessible or are partially accessible. Personally, my recommendation to people is that, like, if you have something you can contribute, if you have something like a tutorial or a workaround that you're aware of that you notice is probably not something that's posted there and people might be looking for it, I mean, now's a better time than ever to post it up there and help get the knowledge base back in full working order. So I'm sure they could definitely use the help.
Again, with the archive, if you Google something and you thought you found the solution in the Manjaro forums, but it says the URL is not resolved, tack archive dot on the beginning of the URL. See if that helps.
Yep.
I think in some ways this could be a great thing for their project, because how often don't you do a Google search and it brings up something that you're searching for, some solution for an Ubuntu derivative, and it gives you an answer from 2010, and it is completely outdated. It's not, but it might even be pre-system D, and this way you can actually get maybe a more current answer. In some ways, that's a disadvantage with forums if they don't clean out some of that old stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you consider that it is a rolling distribution, so things change even more frequently.
Yeah.
Yep.
There are changes all the time. I actually have experienced this when I set up my server and went to set up ZFS. I got an article for Ubuntu from 2016.
Nice. Very nice. That's always helpful when you're looking for stuff, dude. Always.
I saw something cool happen in the MX forums this last week. There was somebody who resurrected a post from years before because it sounded like the same issue, and the moderators stepped in. They said, you shouldn't have reopen this forum thread. You should start a new one because that one was so old. So go please start a new thread with this problem, and then let's address it again afresh.
Yep.
I thought that was kind of a neat way to handle it by the moderators.
Well,
I'm
you know
hoping.
what? There are a lot of people, Steve, that are working in these forums from MX to Ubuntu Mate, and that are like unsung heroes, dude.
Yes.
That do a ton of work behind the scenes and nobody sees it. But man, if they weren't there, you know, it would be a completely different place. Yep. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is I have to talk about what happened on Linux Spotlight this past week. So I had Nate Graham on, and hopefully you guys all watched that because it was a pretty good episode. But like the first part of that didn't go very well, so I just figured I'd let you know what was going on. I had originally scheduled that interview with Nate I don't know, before I had my kidney stones, and then the kidney stones happened, so I had to cancel with Nate, and then we ended up getting together and doing it. I think we started at, I want to say 1 o'clock on a Sunday, and I'm going along and I am recording, and an hour and 10 minutes goes by, and we are recording, and the power goes out. So normally, I mean, everything, like, so one computer stayed on, the main computer did not. So I ended up realizing later that I had plugged my main tower into the surge protector side of the battery backup and not the battery backup side. And I also recorded in .move format with OBS, which, you know, when you first put it to .move format, you get a nice big warning that says, hey, if in case of whatever happens, loss of power or something ridiculous like that, you will lose data. Well, apparently OBS cannot recover from power loss on a .move file. So it can from an MKV file, but not on a .move. And I got back into a 20 gigabyte file that had nothing in it. So lost the Zoom connection and lost that first hour and 10 minutes of talking with him. So I get back and I have to tell him now, like, he's like, oh yeah, we lost connection. Like it's, you know, no big deal, which it really shouldn't be no big deal. But then I have to tell him that I lost all of that whole hour and 10 minutes. So frustrating. And he was so patient with me and said, you know what, let me go get some lunch and then I'll come back and we'll do it over again. And that's what happened. So he ended up coming back and we spent another 2 hours redoing the show and, you know, getting into some great conversation. But I don't know if it was noticeable, like when I first started out, that it was a little frustrating. Like I was a little, maybe not myself normally when I start the show. But that's
you see a little bit of smoke coming out.
Yeah, you might have seen some smoke, Dan, but that's because of the prior things that were going on. But I just wanted to basically say thank you to Nate for being so patient with it and with me. And yeah, he was a great guest. So
I listened to the audio version. I didn't catch any of that.
No, you wouldn't
stress or anything like that. But boy, I thought, man, take two was awesome. That was one of the best interviews you've done. I thought that was really interesting.
He was one of the most engaged that you've had.
Well,
Yeah.
he is.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. He was such an awesome person to talk to because he had such knowledge, like of inside, you know, the KD community and everything else, and he was excited to be there. Like he was excited to talk about it. So yeah, that was a fun interview.
It was good to see the interview turned around on the interviewee.
No, it really wasn't. That was not my favorite part of that, Colin. But I did have to ask him about that whole open as root thing, because there's no way that I could have, like, I had that opportunity talking to, you know, the KDE guy, and I can't pass that up. Like, I can't not ask him. So I ended up having to ask him about the open as root, and I didn't expect that answer, you know, like I wasn't expecting that answer that he gave, but yeah, it was from the heart. So yeah, there you go. So that's the Linux Spotlight saga that happened. All right.
I think
what's up?
Just an FYI, you're now obligated to update your entire Plasma walkthrough series just because of that interview.
It's funny because, I thought about it a couple times that it should be updated because that was so old. But dude, I don't have time for that. Nobody got time for that.
That's a lot of work. So first and foremost, I'm still really impressed because I can barely set up KDE for myself, let alone walk other people through it. So
well, at the time I had time. I don't have that time anymore, just because of doing this and Linux user space and Linux Spotlight. And if I was doing nothing else, I might have time for it, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Shickle, if you think setting up KDE is fun, you should try setting up KDE with i3. It's better.
Oh boy.
Better to set up.
I'm a simple user.
Go ahead.
Rocco, one thing about the recording formats, the reason that you couldn't recover the MOV, but you could have with an MKV, is the MKV is one of the few video container file formats that doesn't require an end, like a sort of ending signal to say, hey, I'm done playing this video. So you can even, the way it works is that you can even watch it while it's recording, because it doesn't require any sort of confirmation that I'm finished playing or I'm finished recording. It's just actual video. So you could even stream the video file out of VLC while you're still recording. It's pretty amazing.
Until the power goes out, and then you can't.
Oh yeah, of course.
Well, that's for the MOV. But see, I switched to MOV not because of anything else except for DaVinci Resolve, because I was trying to save a step. So I would record the episodes in MKV, and then I would have to encode them in MOV in order to put them into Resolve. And it was kind of like, tedious work. So I just figured, hey, I'll switch to MOV, and then I can drop it right into DaVinci Resolve, and that'll save me a step. And it does.
Yep.
But are you going to keep doing that now?
Absolutely.
I actually still run MOV files, yes.
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Actually, quick tip for you, Rocco. OBS has a Remux option built directly into it. And using that is actually way faster than having to transcode it to another format. It takes maybe a minute or two most to re-encode a 30-minute video of mine. So you can actually use the Remux, change the file ending to MOV, because they're almost the same with some DRM exceptions. And that should save you some time if you do ever want to consider it.
All right. I'll have to get with you. But I did change the battery backup, so if I lose power again, I will actually have an hour worth of time to at least shut down the computer so that I can save the file, or stop the recording so I can save the file and then start over. So there you go. All right, we're going to get into our app list. Must-have apps for Ubuntu, unless somebody has something they want to bring up. I guess that dead silence means we're going to the app list.
Actually, if you don't mind, Rocco, I did something this past week that I posted on your biddle on that. I've installed Ubuntu on my main laptop.
You did, Steve. Why? So this blows my mind, dude, because you do not strike me as a guy that would like regular Ubuntu, like regular GNOME, period. Because you've always been with MX, or not MX, Peppermint, and XFCE type distros. So what made you do that?
When 2004 came out, and we did, that's the only test that I did, and I had it on my testing laptop. I was kind of enjoying it. So I'm I don't know. I still have Peppermint on my main desktop. So I was I wanted something on this laptop a little more modern. Just, maybe after 5 years getting tired of a XFCE type distribution. And I after really figuring out that GNOME is actually very, key driven, super key type in, which is what I've been doing in Peppermint for the longest time now. It's really not that different, but like the transitions, the little animations, the way it runs, the way it looks, it is absolutely gorgeous. And I am really enjoying it on my main laptop, and I'm living in it right now.
Well, I think the biggest difference coming from like looking at it, saying what would you see the biggest difference would be to me would be the menu. As soon as you hit the super key, you got this full screen menu that would pop up at you rather than a smaller menu.
Yeah, I've done some tweaking. I did GNOME Tweaks and a few extensions. I got all the dark themes going. But like with Peppermint, maybe it's an XFCE type deal. Screen tearing was terrible. There's a quick fix, a couple of commands, and you can fix it. I didn't have to do that in GNOME. I didn't have to do that in Ubuntu. I'm like, wait, let me check out the screen tearing because I have it's an Intel laptop. It's an HP. But I went to YouTube, looked at the screen tearing video, and it was perfect. There was no screen tear. I didn't have to do anything to it. I like the fact that it picks up my printer. I got a Brother printer right away. It's actually very enjoyable, very modern looking. Like I said, the little animations are just right. They're not overboard. They're not wacky. I don't know, just had a hankering to do something a little bit different and actually live in something for a change. So
now we just need to get you on Pop OS.
So my main desktop is an NVIDIA, has an NVIDIA card in it, and it's a thought.
Does anybody know where the real Steve's gone? I don't know. Somebody go and find Steve's very own.
Colin, it was a shock because, like I said, I just did not picture Steve ever saying, I would like to run GNOME. I just didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing against Peppermint or anything like that. It's just many of you can attest. You run something for a while, and it's just you want to maybe change. And if we had a few more distributions to kind of check out, we'd be okay, right? But so I'm enjoying it.
Well, you'll have to keep us updated on how that goes for you, Steve.
I will.
It's a nice desktop GNOME, I must say. I've always liked it.
I agree. I run it on Fedora 32. I think GNOME's awesome.
And GS Connect is, it's a fork of KDE Connect and that, but that actually is really nice on here, and I'm enjoying it.
Right. Well, like I said, let us know how it goes because I don't know. I think maybe, Steve, I don't think it was something that you wanted new. I think you just got the distro hopper bug and you just wanted something different.
Let us GNOME how it goes.
What's installed.
Beautiful, Shickle.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Bill's in the house. Bill, how are you?
Bill is no longer in the house.
He does this to us all the time, dude. All the time.
Bill has left the house.
Bill, you're a little low.
He's either got a beer or a barbecue going. So
yeah, he's chewing food.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll say hi to Bill later. We love Bill anyway. All right. So 21 must-have apps for Ubuntu. We last talked about VLC, and everybody seemed to love VLC. Can't say that I did or do, but yeah, we'll move on. Still salty about that. GNOME Tweaks is the next one on the list, number 4. Now, this obviously is something that if it's not, I guess we're specifically talking about Ubuntu because it's not like you're going to install GNOME Tweaks for Ubuntu Mate or anything like that. So I guess when we're talking for this app list, we're talking about specifics to the GNOME version of Ubuntu, which is the main version. But anyway, that is on the list. It is a basic it adds all kinds of extra settings that are not in the actual settings of the regular settings of GNOME, which they don't really want you to change. So, but I guess with GNOME Tweaks, they allow you to change it. Still don't know why it's not installed by default on Ubuntu, but it isn't. Colin.
Yep, my thoughts exactly. Why is this not on every GNOME desktop in every distribution that brings out GNOME? I don't know, because everyone likes to change things, or is it because they don't want people messing with those things because it could break something? But I don't see how it could really break anything, to be honest. It's just a matter of adding some themes or extensions and managing things within the desktop. So some people take it away. I don't understand why.
Well, I mean, I guess I maybe kind of see their point that it's there to install if you want it, but for the regular user that doesn't want to mess around with anything, if it's there by default, may mess something up by doing it, by opening it up. I don't know. I still think it should be installed by default.
Well, it's meant to be used by advanced users, so advanced users should be able to install it, should have the knowledge to install it. So
I honestly don't think you need to be an advanced user to install it or to use it, Big Pot. I mean, it's not like,
but it's meant for that. So that's the point of it, the target usage of it. So you should always remember the target user.
I mean, you look at it and like, okay, the buttons are on the right. You want to switch them to the left. You want to switch them to the right, whichever. You click a button, switch the switch, and it's over. It's not exactly advanced user territory that, you got to be a Linux nerd in order to, understand it. So
it's the GNOME desktop. It's called GNOME Tweaks. You go to GNOME Look to get themes and icons. It's all GNOME. So why do you have GNOME Look if you don't want people putting themes in there?
What if I told you that these are kind of aren't the same? They just have the same name. GNOME doesn't actually support theming at all. So the misconception there is probably because they called it GNOME Look, and it kind of used to be a thing that was highly in focus until it started breaking people's stuff. The thing is with GNOME Tweaks is that there's no guarantee that, one, these settings will stay there. So the reason that it might be bad to have something like GNOME Tweaks installed out of the box is because essentially it just exposes a bunch of settings that the GNOME Tweaks developers think might be useful for people that commonly change certain things. The reality of it is, though, is that at any point an update could come along and that no longer works. And that breaks, and that could leave you with a desktop that doesn't work properly, or with a user interface that isn't the way you configured it. I think on top of that, especially with distributions that make their own customizations like Ubuntu, installing something like GNOME Tweaks is sort of an implication that they don't really believe that their implementation of GNOME is right. So if I design something and then I give you a bunch of tools to immediately undo all of my decisions, how confident am I in my design? So why would I ship a tool that immediately undoes the decisions I've made as a developer?
I don't think...
See, I disagree with that because I feel it's mostly user choice. The way I like my
user
desktop
can
set
install
up
it and change it.
Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah. But you should enable your users to make those choices, because that's what Linux is all about, is making your own decisions, not having them force-fed to you.
That's A, not really quantifiable, and B, kind of the user isn't unable to make these choices just because they don't ship it by default. Yeah. They don't stop you from installing it, they just don't ship it with it.
Yeah, it's not like Linux Mint where they just decided, poof, no more snaps. Can't do
it. GNOME Tweaks is just a front end for G settings. Settings.
Yeah, that's true.
Entries. So you could technically go into that and change it without ever installing GNOME Tweaks at all. It's all in there.
So another thing is that sometimes GNOME will actually take inspiration from something within Tweaks and make their own application to do that, like extension management. With GNOME 3.36, they made their own application to manage GNOME shell extensions.
Yep.
But I still find it ironic that their own web browser, Epiphany, cannot install extensions for GNOME Shell.
Well, Thomas, I'm sorry, Colin. Thomas, I used to feel the same way as you were mentioning, that it's limiting and all this other stuff. But especially after talking with and seeing how elementary is progressing and listening to the reasoning behind why they're doing it, it has, I guess, opened my mind a little bit to say that, yes, I would still think GNOME Tweaks should be installed by default, but I'm not mad that you have a company, developers, people who are making a distro and they want people to use it exactly the way they envision it so that it can be this cohesive piece of software rather than a mix match of all different settings and all different kinds of things, and it can be everything to everybody. They have a specific set of people they're going for, and I'm perfectly okay with that. So yes, I do agree that Tweaks should be installed by default. That's my opinion, but I'm not mad in any way that they're not.
You mentioned elementary as an example, and last time I tested elementary, I noticed that there are some settings that in GNOME are relegated Tweaks, specifically related to the keyboard, that elementary actually exposes to the user, like the compose key, and I think some additional layouts like managing caps lock functionality.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, when it comes to the developer and how they make it look, like Chicken was saying, but it's a bit subjective though, isn't it? Because if I wanted to change what the developer's done, I'm not saying they've done a bad job or it doesn't look good. It's just that I might want to change it to suit what I like, right? So they, like take Ubuntu, for example, looks really nice out of the box, but I do like certain window buttons and all that because that's the way I like it to look. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying what they've done is a bad job because I think it looks really nice. I just like it to look a certain way for myself. So, that, and if you, and as another example, if you do install Debian and you run Debian stable, I think they, from memory, they have tweaks out of the box, I'm pretty sure, because
I think I recall seeing it in there.
Yeah. And you probably would want that because, I mean, the stock GNOME looks okay. The latest updates they've done to their icons and all that are okay, but I don't think anyone would pretty much go with the stock icons and themes, to be honest.
Adam Grubbs would.
Yeah.
So I'm not using stock icons, but I am using Adwaita Dark, which I guess is not completely stock, but it's still the dark variant of Adwaita. The main reason I actually ended up installing Tweaks is for the keyboard tweaks that I wanted to do, and I like moving the button, not buttons, but the close button to the left.
Yes.
I'm actually like Schickel, and I actually keep the maximize and minimize disabled.
I am so proud of you.
Well, I definitely like the close button on the left. I do like the minimize button on the right, but definitely get rid of the maximize. But anyway, Colin, that goes back to more of, like I said, there's a difference between limiting somebody and I'll just use the example of Linux Mint, that they said no snaps, period, the end. That's way different than just not installing something by default and still allowing you to change it the way, whatever way you want to. It's like elementary.
Yeah.
You install it and it is the way it is, and that's the way they want their users to use it. But they don't stop you from changing it. You can change it if you'd like to, but you do that at your own risk. So.
Yeah, I sort of get where they're coming from because I don't want, because if they do expose those settings to new users, I can understand that they might start playing around with it and say this looks rubbish, doesn't look nice, because they're probably installing something that doesn't suit the way that they've implemented it out of the box. So I can kind of understand that. But yeah, there is a tool there. It's easy to install. Fair enough,
Also, if they put the tool in by default, then their forums would get people with questions about why didn't this work and then they have to go through troubleshooting. Well, what could have you changed in tweaks that would cause that problem too?
Yeah.
They can avoid, at least, on the surface, avoid that kind of problem.
That's a good point, Ezra. And
Yeah.
and it's almost, it's they don't, if I'm not mistaken, who is behind GNOME Tweaks? It's one developer, I think. It's not the GNOME project.
I don't actually remember who's in charge of that.
So
but,
that would also be them supporting maybe a piece of software that they're not creating. So
yeah,
yeah, good point. Good point. All right, DJ, go ahead.
I was just going to get back to two things. One is if the developers are dictating what features are available to the desktop, that shouldn't be important. Who cares what the developers want? It's what's important is what the users want. And so I've used GNOME for a long time, and I like it, and I have used it for many, many years. But the thing is that when you take away 80% of the capabilities in the previous versions of GNOME, then you got to go resort to something that replaces the functionality that you like. And so I think the developers ought to wake up. I think they ought to listen to the user community and support some of the features that we want, because it is all about choice, and it's all about making the desktop look the way you want. And I don't personally care what the developers want. That's my 2 cents.
So
there's nothing wrong with that opinion, TJ. It is a lot of what the user wants, but there has to be also a picture of where that desktop environment is going. It can't be we listen to every single user out there and we allow every single user to commit to say, hey, we want this feature, we want that feature, we want this feature. And they have this blown up piece of software now that they add all these features because that's what the users want. There has to be some type of vision on their part. And there also has to be some type of communication with the users to say, what is it that you do want and where can we meet in the middle? I don't think it should be either side dictating which one should, where this should be.
So I didn't mean to come away with that impression. Of course not. You don't want chaos.
Right.
But by the same token, how many people here use GNOME or use GNOME every once in a while?
I am currently on GNOME.
Never.
Never. I didn't think you would.
So from the standpoint of those of you that use GNOME, what's the most popular tweak that you put in? That's the basis. That's the basis of which the developer should use.
Well, there is
dashed a panel.
There is so many good tweaks out there, but again, like Dan, he's dashed a panel. I'm dashed a dock. I don't know how you separate that and put that together.
To answer that question, a couple of the tweaks I do are just simple things like I go into and turn on the compose key. I think that's something that should make it to the main settings, because if you're typing in other languages and you're limited to, let's say, US layout, this is something that some normal people who might talk to people internationally might do. The fact that that's relegated to a tweaks app that's not officially supported can be a bit frustrating. There should be better ways to handle accessing those special characters rather than putting that in tweaks. And the other thing I do is I like to go in and turn caps lock off, because I hate accidentally hitting that, and I like using the button as a push to talk key.
So the other thing is, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say they have introduced the latest extension tool. There's a new extension tool. I don't know if GNOME handles that or whether that's another third party as well. I don't know.
That's officially GNOME.
Yep.
That is.
That's officially okay.
Yep.
So go ahead, DJ.
So the only thing I was going to add was that that is exactly how you winnow this list down. Is that you get opinions from the users and you find the ones that come up the most common. As far as what direction that GNOME takes, sure, there should be some architectural planning. But as far as UI is concerned, I think that's in the user domain. I think that has always been in the user domain. If you look at any professional companies that do focus groups or focus studies, it's always users that determine what things look like, never developers. You never want them to do it. Trust me. You'll end up with something that looks terrible.
Well, this is something that me and Nate talked about on the Linux Spotlight, where I do truly think there has to be a give on both sides, where we meet in the middle, where the developers come a little bit closer to the users and say, hey, what is it that you exactly want? And then we as users, like I said, understand a little bit that I still think that there should be not a dictatorship as far as this is not so much as Apple has went, where, they make the UI and you like it or you don't like it. But there has to be that general direction that the company's going and focusing on, like, for example, Elementary, where they say, hey, this is our design preferences on how apps should be built. And we want all of the developers that are actually building apps for Elementary to follow this design code. And I don't see anything wrong with that. I know that there should be user input in that design preferences, in that design structure. But I think we have to kind of like give a little bit so that it can be made better. Because even though I'll give you an example. My dad has Ubuntu Mate, and he has his panel at the bottom, and he has his menu probably, 70% over to the right. Right. Like, no, not in the center, not over to the right. Like, he's got a specific spot that he wants his menu because that's where he wants it. And it's like, if we let it up to like every user, we might not like what that distro ends up looking like. Just saying. Like, that's perfect for him, but for everybody else, I don't think that would work.
So just one final comment in regards to that. And this is from experience. Software that is inextensible has a shorter lifetime. Software that is extensible lasts longer. And over the time, it will cost less money to maintain it.
Which, incidentally,
that's personal experience.
Yep.
GNOME has an extension system, so.
Right, it does.
Yep.
Good point, DJ. All right, Dan, go ahead.
Well, now that we've whittled the cheese wheel down to a stone, all I can say is, like I said, I like the dash to panel because I can't really use GNOME the way it is because it is keyboard driven more or less, right? And the dash to panel and a few other small extensions makes it usable for me, and that's the bottom line. Now, when it comes to packaging tweaks with the desktop, Mate packages their tweaks with their desktop. And yeah, they break too. I tried out Ubuntu Mate a couple weeks ago, and the Redmond function just decided it would puke out on me and it wouldn't work at all. So,
well, just for the record, Dan, I will say that I think the GNOME developers go a little bit too far in that whole "we're going to decide what's best for you" type thing. Just saying, throw it out there.
Yeah, well, at least they give you something. Whether it should be baked into it or not, that's another debate on its own.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a shift in directions in a lot of ways. Like with the extensions thing that was brought up, I think they're starting to realize that user flexibility is a consideration, and sometimes things are tweaked according to whoever's using it, even if the overlying or the overarching theme is essentially design preference. Thomas, what about you? What do you got for us?
Well, as I said before, I believe very much in user choice. As a developer myself, I feel that you should empower your users to have that choice. I remember a time when I started Linux. I didn't like the way my desktop looked. And I won't go into it, but I did not like it at all. But once I finally switched to Unity, I liked it a lot more. And when I found Unity Tweaks, I liked it even more so because I had the ability to tweak it how I liked it. But I had to learn how to install Unity Tweaks because if I remember correctly, at that time, Unity Tweaks was not in the Ubuntu Software Center, which is what it was called at the time. And I don't want new users having that same experience that I did. I want them to be able to go, okay, I don't like the way this looks. I have a settings menu over here that I can change it in, and it's installed out of the box. I don't need to learn the command line, at least not yet. So they have it so that if they want to change it, they can, but they don't have to. If they don't like the way it looks, they can change it. If they like the way it looks and they want to use it stock, by all means. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why I made DruggerOS the way I do. And that's why I also feel that GNOME Tweaks should be installed by default. The only time I would ever say I wouldn't think a second time about GNOME Tweaks not being installed by default is if the people if the GNOME Foundation themselves, or whatever you call them, if they themselves made their own distro. In that instance, I would not be surprised if GNOME Tweaks is not installed by default, and I wouldn't say a word about it. Wouldn't surprise me. Perfectly fine with it. It's not supported by the developers themselves. Okay, fine, sure, works.
Well, Thomas, not everybody, when they come over to Linux, the reason that they come over is not because they don't like the way their desktop looks. There are a lot of people that do, like I did. That's one of the reasons why I came over to Linux, because I could customize it. But not everybody comes for that reason. So if you're a user that doesn't care about that, then it's not going to be a big deal whether or not GNOME Tweaks is installed.
Right. And when I switched to Linux, I didn't switch because Windows didn't look the way I wanted. I switched because that's what the computer I had handed to me was running. And I knew enough about computers to know that installing Windows 8, because that was the latest version at the time, installing Windows 8 on that computer was a death sentence. And I didn't bother with it. And I grew to like it more because I had that configurability. And I completely understand that. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, again, in my opinion, this is a front end. So really, if it exists, okay. If it's installable, okay, but it don't need to be installed by default because it's just a front end to something that already exists.
Well, let's be clear about what we're talking about here. Is like we've got into a discussion about whether it's installed by default, and that's kind of like a side discussion. But really, it's about GNOME Tweaks and what it can do, and should it be on this must-have apps list of the 21 must-have apps for Ubuntu. So that's the real reason. I'm okay with talking about whether it's should be installed by default. I'm just saying the real reason we're talking about it is because it's on this list.
I think that's important
to be on the list.
Yeah. Eris, tell us how much you love GNOME and don't use GNOME Tweaks at all and don't need it.
I don't like GNOME Tweaks. I want everything default. No, actually, I actually wanted to I don't know if we can have another discussion related to this, but I think since everybody likes tweaking their theme, and if you see Ubuntu, they have a different theme. They don't ship with the vanilla Adwaita theme, and so many other distros don't either. I think there's a need for that. But what I wanted to talk is about what GNOME is, the approach GNOME has to the desktop. Like when you had GNOME 2, they rethought everything and they broke away from convention. And going along with that, the placement that GNOME has in the Linux desktop, how it's like the premier desktop in Linux. I don't know if I should talk about that or we'll go into that later.
If you want to, you're up, dude. Whatever you want to go into.
So basically, I like the idea of GNOME that they said we're going to break from convention. We're going to rethink everything. We're not going to go with GNOME 2.5. We're just going to make something different. And a lot of the things I think GNOME does make a lot of sense, like the clock in the top and the panel being moved up.
Definitely.
Because the title bar is at the top. That way you can look at your title bars. Your vision to me, when you're looking at desktop is from the middle to the top. Because if you have your panel at the bottom, then in order to look at clock or anything like that, you have to look so far away. So I think for that makes sense. And I forgot what it's called, but the super key button that shows your different desktops,
workspaces.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. But I think GNOME needs to go further. It needs to push even harder. And what I would, if I had control of GNOME, I would start enabling tiling to it, automatic tiling. Like if you open 2 windows or if you open 2 programs, it should automatically do side by side. It should start doing something like that. I think that Pop Shell is something that GNOME should implement a long time ago, push things further, and have that functionality built in. And also, I would go a step further and go single click.
Wow. That was the big debate, huh? In the Linux Spotlight, Nate talked about how he was a double clicker, and all of a sudden he actually tried single click, and now he likes it. But there's a big Aris, you posted that forum post, and
Farron started the change in the GitHub.
Yeah,
he changed the default. So basically, I would push even harder. But the problem with that is, and it goes along with the whole status of GNOME. GNOME is the premier desktop. It's shipped everywhere, and it almost seems like you can't go too far out because now it's the default desktop everywhere. And if you think about it that way, GNOME is not what I would put somebody who's coming from Windows, unfortunately, because the first thing they're going to say is, "Where's my minimize button?" And if you look at Ubuntu, that's the one thing they bring back. They bring back the minimize button. They bring back the desktop icons. And I think there's a whole lot of conflict there. I think GNOME should, as the project, as the idea of GNOME, they should push even harder and make more radical changes. But that goes against trying to transition people from other desktops to GNOME.
Yep.
So that's what GNOME Tweaks is for, right? That's what GNOME Tweaks is for. Those things that he's just mentioned is what GNOME Tweaks can help you change.
Well, the tiling part, it can't because that's not an option. I wouldn't mind seeing like the tiling version that Pop has in GNOME, but I don't think I would put it on as default because not everybody's a tiling window person. But it should be there as an option, definitely.
Tyler, you got your hand raised. What you got for us?
Yep. So on the discussion of whether it's a must-have application, like I said, I think there are a few settings that I've mentioned before that maybe should be brought to GNOME's settings application. Not everything, but a few. But I don't necessarily think it's a must-have for every user. It's a must-have for me because there's some settings I want to change. But I think most users would probably be content with what's available in the settings application. I just do a few tweaks here and there. I don't really do anything that drastic to GNOME anymore besides use Pop Shell. And I agree with the sentiment that there should be some accommodation for tiling within GNOME to better support tiling functionality. But I also agree with Rocco, it shouldn't be on by default. Whether it just be GNOME exposing more tools within the window manager to make things easier on people like System 76, or as they implement on their own, great, but definitely not on by default, because I think that would probably throw way too many users off initially. Like, I don't even think System 76 has the tiling on by default. It's there, the extension's on, but the tiling itself is not.
Yep.
Well, what bugged me is in my, the tweaks was, you turn it to dark mode, but yet your clock and, if you do the weather or your, corner panel with the shutdown and all that, it's all white, and if I want dark, I want all dark.
Is that on Ubuntu that you're running into that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that's because Ubuntu uses a different shell theme that has lighter elements, whereas stock GNOME Adwaita or just stock GNOME, the shell style in general is all dark, whether it's default light or dark Adwaita.
Hey, Steve. When I switch it to dark mode on Pop OS, it goes to dark mode everywhere.
Yeah.
Just saying, throwing it out there.
He's trying so hard.
So does the so you said going into tweaks, does Ubuntu's own setting to switch over to dark not do that?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I haven't tried it. I haven't tried it.
It does not.
I did Yarrow Dark and Adwaita Dark, and it didn't change those.
It's currently unable to because the shell theme isn't affected by it. It just switches the GTK theme underneath, which changes the style sheet that everything references.
But you should be able to. You should be able to change the GTK or the shell theme in Tweaks.
Yeah,
Tweaks. Yes, if you have the extension to do that installed. Which so I know System 76 in their modified settings application, when you do switch to dark, it does switch everything. But I don't need to do that because Pop OS is dark by default in 2004.
I wouldn't know. I upgraded, Tyler, and I already had it on dark mode. So,
well, I bought a laptop with 2004 out of the box. So,
hey, there you go.
That's one way to do it. Vote with your wallet, man.
Right?
Computer Kid, you got your hand up.
Yep. So I've got a few different points I wanted to make. So I just need to make one quick distinction first. Are we talking about GNOME Tweaks or GNOME Tweaks?
GNOME Tweaks.
Okay. Are you sure it's not GNOME or something? So I use i3 and Plasma. I obviously don't need GNOME Tweaks or a minimize key. I do sort of like GNOME, like the whole workflow, the keyboard drivenness, the full screen launcher and the way the panel works and all that.
This is said. Wait. This is said by like one of those Arch users. You know, I kind of like GNOME, sort of. You know, but
I kind of like it. But I need it. What I needed to do is I needed to tile, like Eris said, and I need it to be, you know, like maybe not be super resource intensive. You know, but one thing about the tiling. If this is supposed to be the radical desktop we're making it out to, that tries new things, that tries more efficient things, like, do we need to be shielding new users from the pain of tiling on the radical desktop? I don't know.
I wouldn't say that Ubuntu's version of GNOME is that radical thing. I would say the GNOME developers are, and that takes a lot of downhill before it gets to Ubuntu and gets to be the new hotness. So maybe if we mentioned Fedora, maybe Fedora would be that one trying that new hot stuff that pushes the envelope. But
Fedora would definitely be a good envelope pusher for tiling GNOME. So my second thing I wanted to say was I think kind of the way we've been talking about it might need a bit of a perspective shift. Because the way we've been speaking about it is as if we're like trying to alter the developers' viewpoint so that they'll do what the users want. But isn't this the open source community with open source developers, where the developers are just people doing this on their time to build something that's probably scratching their itch? Why are we fighting against them to make it scratch our itch instead? This is the open source community. If the developer wants to build something, they should build it. Now, I think there should be a place that's stable where new users can go, but I think the developers should get their playground, should get their place to build. And users either need to, and maybe having developers have places to build creates competition, and we get different places users can go, and there's our choice. We're not shoving developers into the place where we get our minimize button and we get our menu moved over here or our GNOME tweaks or whatever. I think there needs to be this is all my opinion, but I think maybe we need a perspective shift in the way we're talking about that. This isn't like Mac or Windows where you're giving these developers money. They should probably maybe listen to you a little bit.
Well, that's why I said there has to be that balance. because it can't be all one way where the user gets everything they want, but it shouldn't also be the developer gets whatever he wants either. It should be a community project together, and we should be met halfway.
But what's a developer? A developer is a user who's programming in a project. A developer isn't some magical person who holds the keys to create the magical desktop environment. A developer is a user who's programming and creating
the developers are working with projects that are heading in a specific direction. So it's not like, and that's basically what small projects are for, is where a developer goes out and he can do, like Thomas, for example. Thomas found something that he wanted to do and wanted to change and make different, and he went out on his own. He's made his own distro, and that's where he's headed.
Exactly.
Now if
the
Thomas,
users and the developers are two different camps. They're two different people who live in the same camp, and they're the same person, just they do different things in that camp.
Correct, but Thomas now can't go and say, well, I want to join the GNOME development team and then take it in any direction he wants to go. It still has to follow a stream of development.
Yeah,
of course.
Exactly. There's when you're in small teams and you're developing software for yourself or for others in small numbers, it's not hard to communicate and make sure that when everybody is going to bring a different piece of the code to the final build. When you get into large projects, and GNOME is not small. I mean, it's not as big as the Linux Foundation, but it's not small. When you get to that size project, you have to have, you can call it guidelines, you can call it requirements, you can call it cells, you can call it whatever you want, but you need to have some guidebook that everybody's working towards, so that when the software comes together for the build, it's gonna at least work. At least you think it might work. If you have everyone going off on their own and doing things, and you try to bring things together, it might take you a while to make all that magic happen. And so that's why you don't want to leave it all in one way or the other. And we talk in corporate terms, and we talk in corporate terms because of large projects. They just take more time to make sure that everything is going to fit together at the end.
And something worth mentioning is even a lot of these larger projects are still projects run by and developed by a lot of volunteers, especially even GNOME and even Plasma. These are still a lot of volunteers, and we might not have to go and have people do their own separate things. Sometimes, if they're able to approach the GNOME developers or the KDE developers in a good way and ask for a certain setting to maybe be exposed in a way that fits with the GNOME ethos and is willing to contribute and continue contributing to help maintain that and make it a part of GNOME, then they might be open to adding it, because there are things that have been removed in the past because the GNOME developers have said, hey, we put out this call for this person to maintain, let's say, desktop icons, and nobody came forward to actually do it. But then once it was removed, everyone complained.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. But I agree with most of the things that people have said in concept, but I don't think we can just order the developers to do a thing. They're not,
I mean, order, no, but I'm just saying, like, volunteer.
So to follow that bigger whole. They're part of certain groups.
Right.
So need to follow that group's path. They cannot just do something whatever they want.
Right.
Prophetic. You go ahead, Rucka.
No, I was just going to get to him because he's been waiting for so long. Prophetic, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
So this is coming from a person who used to blast GNOME. Actually, me and Dark One, like years ago, would have like a pseudo show. We just hang out on a Tuesday night and then blast GNOME and talk about other Linux things. And it was just like a meme where you're making fun of GNOME. And something in me decided to do some research on why GNOME did the way they did things the way they did. I think if you do the extra work, because GNOME admittedly says that they do a bad job of communicating certain things about their why. If you look at their manifesto and their design principles, there's some really good reasons. And so from a GNOME hater to now someone who's using GNOME on MX, I've kind of come around to a lot of those design elements and those points. And I just want to say that two things. One, um, there's a history why they don't just do willy-nilly with whatever people want, because the more you add, more features you add, there's more code to be maintained, and we spoke about that a little bit already about maintaining and the trust and to Computer Kid's point, in theory, on paper, yeah, you know, you can just contribute. It's open source and all that stuff, but it takes such a long time to earn the trust and reputation. People just bail and they say, "Forget this. I'm going to do my own project," and that's where forks even come in, because there's just like a time issue, volunteer issue, all these things. So there's going to be like fragmentation on that side that leads to, you know, different projects doing their own spins, which is
But that's
again
because
a
it's
good
their
thing.
project. It's the developer's project.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is, though, it's not just like you can just go and submit stuff and then developers be like, yeah, sure, and then they accept it. Um, there's kind of some people are just going to do their own thing, and that's okay. That's why we have other options and stuff like that. But the last thing I was going to say was, damn, I just lost it. Never mind. I'll come back to it.
Okay. Well, like I said, I agree that I'll just sum it up by saying, like I said before, there has to be a give between both parties, community and developers. We have to meet in the middle. GNOME is bad at communication. GNOME is kind of, like I said, hard-nosed sometimes in the way they decide, hey, we're going to remove this, and that's the way it is, and you got to deal with it. You know, for example, system tray icons. To me, it's ridiculous that you don't have system tray icons, but they have their reasons, and that's the way it is. And that's what makes up the Linux community. So it's not like we can say, well, we don't like GNOME, so we're throwing GNOME out the window. Like, they are still a big, huge part of the Linux community. And it's awesome that we have the choices that we have, that we can go and say, you know what, I don't like GNOME, I'm going somewhere else. It's awesome that Thomas was able to say, you know what, I don't like what's out there, I'm going to make my own. That's the awesome part of the Linux community. But if you want to sit down and listen to the developers, like I had said before, Prophetic, you had mentioned it about researching the reasons why. That's why I brought up the fact that, you know, after listening to the reasons behind Elementary for so long now, them, you know, listening to Daniel Foray and Cassidy James and them saying over and over again of the reasons why they do what they do, I don't agree with everything, but I understand the principles behind it, and I'm not no longer upset about it. I know that they have a vision and a goal, and that's what they're going for, and I'm okay with that.
And as much as I hate to be like the kind of like proofs in the pudding, told you so kind of person, but like it's clearly working. And I think that like it's obviously we all have our preferences and we may not like certain design choices. But just kind of, yeah, the fact that they're willing to not only stick with the choices that they make, but very clearly explain them and define them is kind of a case for understanding them. And perhaps maybe if it doesn't work for you, maybe it doesn't work for you. But I mean, so far, App Center's doing well. They've got hundreds of apps there now from open source developers specifically for Elementary OS. Like, it's working.
So I want to echo what Prophetic said on the like if you asked me 3-4 years ago, I would have just railed on GNOME. I hated it 3-4 years ago. But here I am. I have Fedora workstation on my desktop running GNOME. I installed Pop Shell on it. I've got Pop OS on my Lemur Pro, you know, no stock GNOME that comes with Pop OS, Pop Shell again. It's fantastic. I put Fedora Silverblue, which is another GNOME desktop, on my ThinkPad the other day. So
And one last
I
thing
love
too,
GNOME now.
Yeah, it's definitely grown on me after you get the design understanding underneath it, and it takes work. Let's be honest, it takes work, and some people are just not willing to do the work on the research and why. People
Or it
they
takes
find
them willing to change, Prophetic. And
yeah,
maybe they're not
yeah.
willing to change.
That too. But I mean, in terms of like trying to understand why, like you have to research. It was hard for me to find these blogs because they're so the GNOME blogs. Sometimes they make it to GNOME.org, and they're like kind of brought in and republished there. But a lot of these designers and even when Miguel was part of it, who helped was the founder of GNOME, he left the project, but finding his blogs was kind of hard to see what the thinking was back then. I went like that far back to understand. And it took legwork, and some people are just not willing to put the legwork in. They feel more comfortable complaining and arguing, and that used to be me about it. But it definitely makes it more accessible to use GNOME now because I understand that. And the thing that kind of escaped me, I was trying to remember, was that you'd be interesting to see that a lot of people who use Plasma do a lot of things that are implemented by default by GNOME, and they gnomify their Plasma experience from time to time. And I've seen that a lot and heard that a lot too. So it's interesting that kind of makes its way in Plasma users.
Yep. Quote of the day from Nate Graham. What did he say? GNOME is good at being GNOME.
Yeah.
Just to sum up, Rocco, GNOME Tweaks is a Swiss Army knife for the modern desktop.
I like it.
Yep.
Heck yeah.
And you could get cut.
And can I say, how did we talk for an hour on GNOME and GNOME Tweaks? Like out of this list, like we got one. So that was totally unexpected, but awesome.
There are lots of opinions.
Computer Kid, go ahead.
Yeah, my last point about GNOME Tweaks was going to be that if Ubuntu wanted to adopt it and bring it into their GNOME desktop experience, they could treat it a bit like ZFS, where it was obviously going to be a support burden because it's not fully supported in Linux. They're going to have to do their builds in-house. They're going to have to test to make sure it doesn't break their Linux kernel. But they could make it an integrated experience. They could mark it as a beta feature. But if they wanted to, breakage and support wouldn't be an issue, just like it wasn't with ZFS.
To be honest with you, I just don't think it's on the radar. Like, I don't think anybody's looking. Like, I don't think anybody at Canonical is saying, "Hey, maybe we should put GNOME Tweaks in." You know, like I don't even think that's on the radar. Just a non-starter.
They have a full desktop team. I'm sure it's in the back of the mind, even if they're not thinking about it for GNOME, even if they're not thinking about it for the Ubuntu desktop experience. I'm sure there are people there who know about it, and I would be willing to guess there might even be people there who use it on a daily basis.
Maybe. But that's all the time we have. Prophetic used up all our time. And we are out of it. So that's going to be it for this show. But everybody gets a last word. Schickle, start it out.
Oh my goodness, it's me. Well, I started a new YouTube channel in case anybody's watching or wondering. I may have accidentally eaten my other one in an account transfer. So now I still post videos. So if you want to find me, good luck.
Why don't you post a link for it in YouTube?
Oh, yeah, I guess I could do that.
Yes, please. I was wondering what the Telegram chats were all about. I thought I didn't see any videos come up from Schickle at all.
All right.
You got all into Bitwarden.
Tony, last word.
Yeah, thanks for a great show, Rocco. Interesting conversation. Sorry I didn't join in much. I was really tired and struggling quite a bit. But I did manage to make it to the end. So take care, everyone, till next week, and I hope to see you all same time, same place.
Big Pot, last word.
See you next week.
Tyler, last word.
So to go back to the KDE and GNOME thing, both great desktops. I think they have both improved drastically in the last 3 to 4 years, and I think they both have fantastic communities that with development teams that work together and congratulate each other. And the attitude that the Linux desktop development communities put out these days is so much better than it used to be, and I love the positivity there.
Amen to that. Steven, last word.
First of all, thanks for the awesome show, Rocco, and guys. Great to see everybody. Just a quick comment. I'm not a GNOME user, but I would say that just the general discussion tonight and the fact that we can talk about all the choices that we have is a great testament to the community. I think that we're choice is good, and not only within software and configuration, but in terms of the software choices that we have, and I think that we're very fortunate for that. So,
yep, agreed. Dan Kelly.
Computer Kid, great job on the laptop rebuild. I'm glad you got it all to work. I was kind of following it on Telegram, but I got bits and pieces only as the days went on. GNOME Tweaks, interesting topic, Rocco. I mean, it is supposed to be the top 20 things you got to have for Ubuntu.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Excellent show. A lot of great topics came up. Had a great time. Hope to see you all again next week.
Computer Kid, last word.
Thanks for letting me hang out and talk for a while about GNOME Tweaks and my laptop. Dang it, I did a prophetic and forgot what I was going to say. There you go. I guess I'll see you all next. Oh, actually, I remembered. So, 2 pro tips I learned this week. First of all, if your laptop won't boot up, check the little cable at the end of the power button. It's apparently damageable, but you might be able to fix it with a pair of tweezers. Second pro tip, if WireGuard won't connect, make sure it's not blocked in the firewall. And if you're using a VPS, there might be a firewall on the VPS. It will make you very angry if you don't find it.
DJ, last word.
If you're homeschooling, there's an interesting OS you might want to check out, Quibian. Have a video on it I put together this week. 17-year-old out of Panama that's working on it. See you next week, y'all.
All right, Jinda, last word.
Oh, thanks, Rocco. Thanks, Chickle. Computer Kid, I'm very proud of you. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. I'm glad it worked out for you. It was a good learning experience, even if it didn't work, because no one's going to care that you killed a 9-year-old laptop anyway, except for you. You probably get one for free if you ask around. So I'm glad you took that initiative.
Vince, last word.
Awesome show again, as always, Rocco. You really need to worry about having enough topics for the show, man. There's always plenty to talk about, right?
It's not the amount of topics I worry about, Vince. It's the dead air in between.
All right. Someone will always jump in. And if you guys out there haven't joined in, if you want to continue the conversation, make sure you join the Telegram for Big Daddy Linux and the Discourse. Because if anything, Shickle's stickers are a sight to behold.
Right? Colin, last word.
Well, Rocco, if I need to change my icons or my GTK theme or even my shell theme, or maybe just change my buttons from left to right, GNOME Tweaks is a must-have application.
I knew it, Colin. Anyway, I knew
it. Anyway, I enjoyed the conversation tonight. It was very good. Everybody enjoy your week and see you next week. Take care.
Asnick's last word.
Oh, well, thank you, everyone. I know I've been pretty quiet, but the GNOME discussion was interesting. So maybe I should use it once in a while.
You won't like it, dude.
I like desktops that actually have the tools I want included in them.
Yeah.
And not extensions or add-ons that I have to hunt down.
Yep. You're right. Steve Varione, last word.
No problems touching a button today. No, thanks, Rocco. Appreciate it. I will keep you guys up to date on GNOME. I'm enjoying it. Might be the new future. So everybody take care, and y'all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're from.
And don't forget to check out the coffee tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Get the coffee now before the coffee shortage comes.
There you go. Costco run. Thomas, last word.
Well, thank you for having Biddle again this week. It was a lot of fun, even though I was a couple minutes late. Thanks, Anime. Two things. First off, shameless plug, ChromeOS is finally having the stable release of the next version in 2 weeks. So
Good job.
Yeah, it's been 6 months in the making, actually longer than 6 months, but that's besides the point. Best release so far, I guarantee it. Second thing, you know, with all the talk of GNOME and GNOME tweaks, you know, GNOME is great and all that, but XFCE for the win.
We'll see. Aris, last word.
Thank you very much for the stream. I just wanted to mention that from the Nate Graham's interview that a lot of the desktops are not in the same position that GNOME is in terms of developers, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. And you can see the difference once Ubuntu started doing more development for GNOME. GNOME became much lighter and became more usable, in my opinion.
Yep.
And that has made a big difference.
Prophetic, last word.
It's been great with the little chat that we had with GNOME, and yeah, thanks for having me, and hope everyone. I think maybe as a challenge, if you have time, someone should try either a software or a desktop environment that they haven't tried in a long time, or they quote unquote hate, just to poke at it and see where it takes you. Never hurts to just try something out new.
Bill, are you there, Bill?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. What's going on?
So I did something like I did a super Tony. So Prophetic just said you should try things you haven't tried in a while.
Oh my gosh, don't tell me.
And Chicken kind of inspired me this morning. So I've been running ChromeOS
Oh man.
through Neverwhere. And it's actually very interesting. And so that's just a short thing that I'm doing today. Thanks, Prophetic.
All right. Thank you to Schickel for helping me out with tonight's show. And check out linuxuserspace.show for the next episode of Linux User Space, which comes out Monday. It's already edited, and it's ready to release for Monday morning. So check that out. I don't have any Linux spotlights recorded yet, so I have one lined up, but I don't have any recorded yet, but they'll be coming as soon as I can. Other than that, we will see you next week. But until then, long live Linux.
Take care, everybody.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
See you guys.